Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. So I'm going to go through some basic slides on procurement. It would be far better for me if people ask questions as we go through, as already stated. I have got some slides. We don't have to stick to them, but they cover the topic. So I'm very happy to go through them, and we'll start that way. Please feel free to stop me at any point to ask anything you want, and hopefully Georgia will see the hands that are raised, and we can come to you for your question. So what I'm going to cover, he says, can I just make an assumption here? Can everybody see the slides?
Yes,
Georgie,
looks good.
Okay. So what I want to do is just give a very quick introduction to the procurement and the public contracts regulations. So why are we doing this, and what are the public contracts regulations, and why do we need to comply? And I'm going to give some top tips before you start in terms of the things to consider before you tender, some guidance on completing the tender, some basic mistakes, which are probably the opposite to the things you should do when completing the tender, a little bit about the e-tendering software that we will utilize during this process, and then really it's over to you for any questions and answers. So moving swiftly on then, the public contracts regulations 2015 apply to Fair4All Finance because they are a body governed by public law. They're getting funded by government and therefore required to comply. It's certainly with NILS and with a few other tenders, the limits that apply to the public contracts regulations will be exceeded, and therefore we need to make sure we comply with those. It's not a bad thing, it's a really good thing, because the public contracts regulations are very much around non-discrimination and transparency, and that's very much for us making sure that you've got all the information you need, and for making sure that there's a real consideration of what value for money is. And just to read one line from the public contracts regulations, the procurement should be based on value for money, which is a mixture of quality and effectiveness, and those are really critical. And then it's for the least outlay for the period of the services. So it's not about cheapest. I don't do this job. I haven't done it job for many years to do the cheapest, because that always comes back to bite you. It's about the quality of the service that's being offered, or the goods, and also how the effectiveness and how sometimes that service develops with the requirements of the organisation. So that's sort of the overview of the public contracts regulations. Is any question? I don't expect there will be, but is there any questions around those? No?
No hands up.
Okay, good. I hope that's really clear. Right, so in terms of sort of top tips before you start, first of all is don't do it if you don't think you can win it, because just going in with the right attitude is really important, that you have the right credentials and this is something you want to do. Do your homework. We will issue you with a range of documents. There's already been, and certainly for NILS, quite a range of information produced, and we will with the tender we will send that back out. But the specification is really the critical document, and I'll come on to talk about documents later. But make sure that you really understand the requirement. And aligned with that one is ensure you understand the point scoring mechanisms so that you're maximising your answers to the questions asked. That, to me, is another really good pointer here. And probably a good point here, I think you may have already said it, George, but we will send this out afterwards, so there's no need to make notes on this. We will send you out this presentation slides. And say answer the question with the information you have requested and not the information you believe we should know. We really don't want marketing information. I can guarantee you that. And I'll come on a little bit about remember what it's like on the other side of this process. So this is really just a sort of quick one about being clear about having done your homework. There's plenty of information around in the tender documents that will need reading, and make sure you spend the time. I always align tendering to like a job application. If you really want that job, you have to spend the time putting together a really good application. And this is, rather than being an application for you personally, this is an application for the organisation. So it's really important that that you spend the time that's required on it. I think the other sort of main thing as well is when you sort of start reading it, make sure you can fulfil the criteria. So there might be some questions about minimum financial criteria. There may be some is it feasible? Can you meet the requirements? Do you have the required accreditation? And do you possess the relevant experience? Now, I would say to you here, the key questions that I'm always getting asked is, how would we know that? Well, if you're not sure, just ask us. And during the tender process, there is a questions and answer section on the tender portal, and it allows you to ask as many questions as you like. And I would certainly recommend that if you're not sure about anything, just ask us. I would much rather we had questions, lots of them, because it shows you're engaged. It's not a negative thing or something that we're going to look at that we mark you down on. It's actually something that we welcome to make sure that you've got clarity of the requirements. Okay, before I move on, Georgia, is there any questions about that one?
Not that I can see so far.
Okay, good. So in completing the tender, please, if you can just remember from the other side, if it's got a word limit or a page limit and it says 2 pages or it says 4 pages, that is all that is required. That is the maximum required. You don't have to do 2 pages if you haven't quite got 2 pages. What's more important is the content and making sure that you're using headings matched to the deconstructed parts of the question. So what I mean by that is if the question is asking you 2 or 3 things, it's really useful for us reading it to have a heading breaking down those 2 or 3 things, so that we can make sure that you're answering the right parts of the question and we've got a response for each of those. Please don't use filler or fluff. I think I got accused of that at school when we used to write essays at school, putting filler and fluff in at the end of stories. It doesn't add anything to your bid, and we certainly don't want marketing information. We need clarity, and making it to the point is far better. And also using bullet points is a really useful as well. So I've often written sentences, and in the end, actually, that's better off broken down into 4 or 5 good bullet points to answer a question. And then afterwards, and these are the things that often come through, is sometimes there were mistakes in tenders. I've read many tenders where, working for a housing association, the tenders come through telling me you're a really good council, a local council, and therefore sort of around the attention to detail that people do just change names in tenders, but it's very important that you proofread. And I think the other point I wanted to make on this one is that if you've got different people completing the tender, it's quite important, if you can, to have somebody independent read the tender to make sure it's joined together, because sometimes it's quite clear to me when there are different people writing the tender, which is fine, but actually there's not a golden thread, if you like, that goes through the tender, so that we can sort of pick it together and make it work as a complete document. Always good to do that review, and somebody independent who's not written it and is sort of able to scrutinize it in more detail. And then on the reverse side of that, I would say that these are the most common mistakes when answering tenders, and it's really just around not answering the question that is asked, not doing your research, so it's clear that you've missed or misunderstood the question and not done the research that is required on it, not taking the time. Sometimes you do run out of time and we get very basic answers, and you'll see one of those in the example that I give in a bit. It's really important to try and plan ahead so that you've got the time to put in your best response. If you do miss the deadline, because we're using the tendering system, you will miss the deadline, and it's very important that you meet that deadline on the day and by the time that you have to submit your information. I have received, ignoring the requirements of the tender, I have received many times just a cut and paste of a marketing document instead of the answering the questions. And therefore, you don't score many points when you do that. And then bidding for absolutely everything when actually your specialism might be in one area. So rather than, and when you do that, you're almost diluting your response. It's really important to bid for things that you can actually deliver, and those are the common mistakes that I see. It's not time again, but often during different tenders. This is a very worthy example, and because we're sending this to you, I don't expect you to. I'm not going to read it in detail, but the question said, provide examples of your company's historical involvement in the development of skills within your existing workplace. So the question is asking for your historical involvement in the development of skills and your existing workforce. And a poor answer, and I think you'll clearly see, is our staff are encouraged to develop their skills is not the best answer you're ever going to get. But the excellent answer, and actually there's more you could do to this, but they've done 4 very succinct, clear paragraphs. The first one is, we are dedicated to continued professional development, and that comes across, that's clear. The second paragraph says they have a clear process for identifying appropriate courses for their staff, that their employees are able to identify appropriate courses, and they work together with their line managers to do that. That the employees are expected to commit to qualifications, so it's a two-way process. And the final one is that there is a mentoring system in place, and there is clarity over the minimum requirements, minimum qualifications that all staff need to follow. And that is a good answer. If I was going to be hypercritical and say, to improve it even further, what I would be putting on is some data, some information, or an example to say, last year, so many staff completed training programs, and next year we aim to deliver the following the following number of courses within the organisation, and to show that that's improving year on year. That would be a very good example to answer that question. Just want to spend a little bit of time going through e-tendering. So we have, Fair4All Finance will be using a piece of e-procurement software called Market Dojo. It's quite a simple system where the information that we are going to ask you to complete will be loaded on. And the way that will work is there are generally 5 documents that we'll put onto the system. And just for example, this might not be exactly the same for Nils or some of the other tenders that Fair4All Finance might undertake. But the first one will be an instructions and information booklet. That is clarity on what is required and the information you're going to need to submit. It also includes quite a lot of detail about how the tenders will be scored as well. So if you ever have the time or want to be clear about how a tender is going to be scored, then the information that's in the instructions booklet is very, very useful for you. So, and again, the other thing I would say to you is to read them in order as well. So the second document, which is the specification, that is the requirement. So if that's for Nils, that will say very clearly what is required in the different lots that this tender is going to be broken down into. So that specification is absolute clarity on the requirements. And then the next document is a pricing matrix, and we will put in there how it's going to be priced, whether that's that could be a day rate, that could be rates. I think for Nils, it's very clear what those rates are going to be. We've already given indications of those rates. But also within the pricing matrix, we also will put a section in which allows you to make your own suggestions on the pricing matrix. So what we would ask you to do is complete the Fair4All pricing matrix. But if you've got an alternative, a different proposal, then you're able to put that in there as well. So if you believe a different pricing matrix or a different approach would work, you're able to put that submission in. What we'll also give you is a copy of the draft contract, and that's your opportunity to have a look at it and if there's any real areas of concern, there will be a section within the response document which will allow you to say we would struggle with section 2.2. We would need to have a discussion about this. The reason we put the draft contract in is so that we don't get to the end of the tender process and we can't agree terms. We'd much rather know up front what the challenges might be in signing a contract. I have to say that having reviewed the contract, it's very mutual. It's written that it's not just Fair4All Finance saying you must do this. It's a mutual one. So if there's a contract extension, it has to be mutual. If there are changes to the terms and conditions, it has to be mutual as well. So it's not written purely from the point of view of Fair4All Finance. And the final document is the response document. There might be two of those. There might be an A and a B. And the response document includes what's called it's a government standard supplier questionnaire. And that document includes lots of information that's requested that every single supplier in the UK that's bidding for public sector contracts will fill in. So even if you use that as a learning opportunity, if you're bidding for public contracts, the supplier questionnaire is pretty standard across the whole of the country. That was one of the recommendations from 2015, in that every organisation seemed to have its own documentation. There was no consistency, and so this supplier questionnaire is a really good development, in my opinion, and that it asks you for that information. It will ask you lots of questions. Most of it is sort of like a self-serve type document where you can tick boxes to say yes or no, and that once you fill one of these in for Fair4All Finance, it's the same document for anybody else that you might do tenders for in the public sector. And then what happens with that information is once you've got your response document, so you would have a response document, you would have your pricing matrix, and you would be, those are the documents that you would look to put back on the portal by the deadline. And I've missed out point 3, which is that throughout the whole of the process, you've got the ability to ask questions and seek clarity. And we really do welcome it. What happens with that is somebody asks us a question and we think that everybody should know the answer to it, i.e. we will send it out to everybody. So one of the reasons we use e-tendering software is because just with a click of a button, I can make sure that information goes all the way out to everybody that's applying for a tender, that's had the documentations to date. And that's, again, it supports the transparency and fairness. We're not trying to make sure that somebody has information that others don't have. We want everybody to have the same information. And then going back to point 4, by the deadline, you can put your tender documents on. If you decide that having submitted it, you wanted to make changes, then you are able to do that within the system. You could take your documents off and you could reload them on there as well. But my recommendation would be is to wait until you've got all your documents complete and then put those onto the system so that they can just be submitted by the deadline. Okay, that's e-tendering. I'm really at the point where, do we have any questions? And I can come off. I have got 2 more slides about process. So this just explains the process where we effectively, stage 1 is what we've been through to date. Stage 2 is the tender process. And there are 2 more. One is about how the process for awarding a contract. And the 4th one is then about contract mobilization. I don't intend to go through those in detail unless anybody's got any questions on those. And I'm happy to come off there and off these and see if anybody's got any questions. Does that all make sense or not?
I'm not very good at holding the silence, but I'm going to leave a gap in case anyone has any questions that they've not just coming to mind. Or that means, Gary, that you've covered all the points so well that everyone's got all of the information that they need.
I hope not. I'd like to know at least one question. Phil, you're quite right. It is straightforward. Anybody else? No? Okay. So I just probably, George, it's good to say that if people are applying for NILS, the tender, we're looking to launch the tender in the next couple of weeks. And what's on offer here is there's two things really. One is to send these slides out so that people can just use it as an aid memoir. And the second thing is, if anybody wants a copy of a supplier questionnaire that is used across the public sector without the questions we're going to ask, I'm happy to provide you with a copy. I've got one, Georgia, that I can just give it to you. That if somebody said they'd find it useful just to have an awareness of the questions that are going to be asked up front, then happy to include that as well as the information that gets sent out to people.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. Fantastic. Well, also, if any questions come to you over the coming week, we're here, so absolutely do get in touch. And I think, as Gary said, there's also kind of an opportunity to ask questions during the procurement process. If you are interested in bidding in NILS, I think we're hoping to get to publish the invitation to tender probably around the kind of 21st of January, 21st of November, week commencing the 21st of November. So look out for that.
Okay. Can I just leave you and say the one abiding thing for me is during the tender process, please ask questions if you're not sure. We'd much rather answer them for you than you sort of go ahead and submit your bid without having got clarity. Clarity is the bit that's really important. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.